Returning now to the Israeli airstrike killings of Australian aid worker Zomi Frankcom and her 6 colleagues. Prime Minister Antony Albanese has doubled down on his calls for Israel to be held accountable for the killings. But outrage around the world is now turning to the supply of weapons to Israel. For more, I'm joined by Antony Loewenstein, an independent journalist and Walkley Award-winning author of The Palestine Laboratory, who lived in East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Antony, do you accept Israel's explanation that the airstrike that killed the World Central Kitchen team was a misidentification?
No, is the short answer. And the reason I say that is, having reported on these kinds of issues for many years, including in Gaza itself in the last 15 or 20 years, these sort of cases actually happen all the time, mostly to Palestinians, less so to Westerners or Western aid workers, as in this case. But essentially what has been very clear in the last 24 hours, based on people I'm speaking to in Israel, but also Israeli media, particularly Haaretz, the newspaper there, is this really is an example of a very, not just lax rules of engagement, but barely any real interest in the mass targeting of people. So although this aid organisation worked with the Israelis, was actually a designated aid organisation, was providing essential care to Gazans who are literally starving as we speak, this was a deliberate targeting of their car. And that's based on not just people that I'm speaking to, but also evidence that was based on Haaretz, a newspaper, in the last 24 hours. So we don't accept this explanation. And many countries that have had these kinds of experiences before know that when Israel talks about having an independent investigation, it always leads to the same conclusion. No one's found guilty, and everything just moves on. And this cannot be the case when an Australian citizen is frankly killed.
And Antony, that's what our PM has called for, a full, transparent, clear explanation from Israel. But can it be transparent if Israel investigates itself?
Well, no. I mean, Israel claims it's an independent investigation, but there are so many examples over the last decades where Israel has claimed that they will investigate themselves or an independent investigation happens. The problem is, whenever Israel commits crimes, war crimes in Gaza, the West Bank or elsewhere, there is such a low rate of prosecution and charging of Israeli soldiers or military figures or government figures in these kinds of crimes, which is clearly this is a crime. When there's so many, I mean, as I said, there's been 35, 40,000 Palestinians slaughtered in the last 6 months. This particular case shows that there will not be an independent investigation. So the Australian government needs to do far more than express concern or outrage. There needs to be tangible action.
Antony, what type of weaponry does Israel have in its arsenal? How precise can it be?
So Israel has been using, in this particular case, called an Elbit drone. Elbit is Israel's largest defence company. It's been around for decades. I do a lot of work on that in my book, The Palestine Laboratory. And Israel has been using these drones across Gaza for years. And this was a supposed targeted missile that hit these 3 aid cars. And it's important to note that Elbit has deals with many countries around the world, including Israel, including Australia. Australia just this year, since October 7, has signed a close to $1 billion deal with Elbit. At the very least, the current Australian government needs to cut that deal, at the very least. And beyond that, Australia for a long time, including since October 7, is involved in a global supply chain for Israeli weapons, particularly around fighter jets that Israel's using over Gaza. We are a key part of that global supply chain. Various companies in Australia are providing, as one example, the door that opens above Gaza is provided by an Australian company in Victoria. So Australia is deeply complicit in these kinds of crimes. And I think when Australia has said for the last months, Prime Minister Albanese or Foreign Minister Wong, that we have not been sending weapons to Israel, that's frankly untrue, and they need to be held to account for those kind of untruths.
Well, Antony, the Australian government continues to reject allegations that it supplies weapons to Israel, but there are claims weapons parts are supplied. So does this mean Australia does supply weapons to Israel?
Australia is supplying parts to weapons that Israel is using over Gaza. I'm the co-editor of an organisation called Declassified Australia, and one of our writers a few months ago, Kelly Tranter, who's an experienced human rights lawyer, detailed, people can find this easily online, detailed in this story how Australian companies are part of a key global supply chain, amongst other nations, that are providing key parts for Israeli weapons over Gaza. And a number of countries in Europe, for example, in the Netherlands, have attempted to stop that transfer of weapons, and that's been successful in the last few months. So the Australian government's being dishonest when they're saying that we do not provide weapons. Maybe we're not sending missiles to Israel tomorrow, but these parts are a key part of what Israel is using over Gaza.
Antony, what happens if the supply of weapons to Israel is stopped?
Israel cannot fight this war without weapons. And we've seen all the last 6 months, even when Israel continues to commit more and more grievous human rights abuses and war crimes, that the US flow of weapons and Germany, the two biggest provider of arms, has continued. Even in the last week, when Joe Biden and other leaders have expressed growing outrage with Israeli actions, no one thus far, of a major power at least, is stopping to send weapons. That conversation needs to happen in Australia now. Now, Australian weapons obviously not the major supply to Israel, they're not, but we are a key partner of Israel, have been for decades. And Australia needs to go well beyond expressing concern or outrage. This is not enough. An Australian citizen is dead. 35 to 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, the vast majority of whom are civilians. At the very least, there should be a global arms embargo, and Australia should be a key part of enforcing that.
Antony Loewenstein, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.